This is a story of three people whose lives came together when they each followed their dreams to serve this country in the United States Coast Guard. You might say their lives collided. When you join the armed forces, you never really know where in the world you might end up. But wherever that may be, at any given place, at any given time, people from all over the country, possibly from all over the world, cross paths. People from very different backgrounds, many different life experiences, they get randomly thrown together as they embark on their military careers. Relationships develop, bonds form. These people become your family, your brothers and sisters in arms. Today, we're going to look at one relationship that formed in the frigid tundra of Kodiak, Alaska, a place where both of these Coast Guardsmen had listed as the last place on Earth that they wanted to be stationed. Yet, there they were. And from that, a close friendship was born of it. We're going to see what can happen when people are put together in oftentimes tense and stressful situations, combined with the possibility of a lifelong struggle with mental health issues, in this 177th episode of Killafornia Dreaming, the tale of a rape of the mind. Let me take the time to thank you as always for listening to and enjoying this podcast. This is a completely independent, ad-free, one-woman production, and there are a number of ways that you could help support this show. You can leave a nice review on Apple Podcasts. That helps give the show more visibility and pushes us up the charts. You can also recommend us in the true crime fan groups on Facebook, as well as on Twitter and Instagram. And if you can't get enough of Killafornia Dreaming, you can subscribe to our Patreon, where you can not only access dozens of full-length exclusive bonuses for as little as $1 a month, you will also be helping to keep this podcast afloat. This week, I'd like to thank, and I hope I'm saying these names right because there's some that are a little bit different that I'm not sure how to pronounce. Adarinsula A, Julian S, Lori O, Floridia A, Kelly H, Brittany P, Jennifer C, Deanna B, and Natalie W for joining Patreon. Also Kelly B, Rebecca O, Tony M, and Maria D for raising their pledges to the next tier, and John S for making a one-time contribution through PayPal. And speaking of PayPal, if Patreon isn't your thing, but you'd still like to contribute to supporting this podcast, you can make that one-time donation through PayPal using our email, killaforniadreaming@gmail.com. Thank you all for helping me in keeping this podcast going and for keeping it ad-free. And please stay tuned at the end of this episode. You will be hearing a promo from a podcast called Excuse Me, That's Illegal. It is crimey, but a little bit more fun. All right, let's get this episode started. On his 31st birthday, February 5th, 2015, a man by the name of Adrian Loya had a plan. A plan that was meant to be a murder-suicide type of event that was 3 years in the making. At least that's what Loya outlined in a 250-page manifesto he would write sometime between the years of 2012 and 2015. 250 pages. That even eclipses the lengthy manifesto written by the misogynistic incel, the Isla Vista shooter Elliot Rodger. His was only 150 pages if I remember correctly. I tried and tried to look for a transcript of this manifesto. I wanted to read it so badly. All the forums on this case had commenters begging for links to the thing, but as far as I could see, it was nowhere to be found on the internet. If any of you do any searches and are able to find it, please let me know. But anyway, I'll come back to Adrian Loya and his plan a little bit later. So there isn't a ton of information out there on this case, There is a really good article in Psychology Today, and there is a Crime Watch Daily episode, but I found that the Crime Watch Daily show had left out or made some errors in the telling of the story, so I'll try my best to get as specific as I can. Even some of the dates aren't clear. What I do know is that all of this started on one drunken night in September of 2012. That was the beginning of Adrian Loya's spiraling. In the article in Psychology Today, which I will be referencing several times throughout, described Loya as having lived an existence of perpetual underachievement. He was born in El Paso, Texas on February 5th, 1984. He was the eldest of three to father George Loya and mother Shirley Guerrero. They weren't married when Shirley became pregnant with Loya, though the couple did get married when he was about 2 years old, but the union would not even make it to their second anniversary. As a young child, through preschool age till about the 3rd grade, Loya was described as withdrawn. This can manifest itself as a fear or hesitation to be around people or engaged in social situations. It's often also described as a child being shy, but this can also become problematic if it hinders the child's ability to form relationships with others at school or in other social situations in the child's life. However, after the age of 8, there was a significant change in Loya's overall personality. He went from being shy and withdrawn to being an aggressively confrontational child. And it seems as though the ones who bore the brunt of his volatility were his younger siblings. Loya's mother felt as though his issues should have been dealt with by a mental health professional experienced in working with young children, but his father shot down the suggestion. The dad attributed the inexplicable shift in their son's behavior as a phase that he was going through. Don't worry, it'll pass. Famous last words, right? While the article didn't say why Loya was ultimately separated from his siblings and sent to live with his dad, I can only assume that it probably had something to do with his attitude and behavior towards them. But at some point, Loya's mother decided to move away from El Paso all the way to San Antonio. You know, Texas is the second largest state in the Union, and this was a fairly significant move, a total distance of 550 miles or 885 kilometers. But when she made this move, Loya, her eldest son, her troubled son, opted to stay in El Paso with his dad so as not to have to change high schools. As a student, well, he left much to be desired. He was described as a decent swimmer on the high school swim team, but when it came to his studies, completing his homework, things of that sort, it just wasn't a priority for him. He procrastinated, but mostly chose to not complete most of his assignments. Overall, he was described as performing poorly in school. Whatever was going on with him between the ages of 18 and 21 isn't clear. It doesn't seem as though college was in the cards for him, but in March of 2005, he went ahead and enlisted in the United States Coast Guard. His motivation was to move out of his dad's house. It's also been said that he sort of knew that he needed and wanted the kinds of discipline and job security that military service had to offer. Another central figure in this story is a woman named Lisa Berlanga. The Crime Watch Daily article on this case opened with this very first sentence. From a young age, Lisa knew two things: that she wanted to serve others, and the other was that she was gay. Things would eventually come together for Lisa when she too joined the United States Coast Guard. And it was there that she met the woman who would become her wife, Anna Trubnikova, also a fellow guardsman. And I say guardsman because it's the only term used when talking about members of the Coast Guard regardless of gender. There is no guardswoman or guardsperson, I checked. They also tried Coast Guardian for a while, but they stopped using that in 2008. Maybe it sounded too much like a Marvel comic character or something. Anyway, since this was the military and the don't ask, don't tell policy was still in effect at the time, what that meant was that Lisa and Anna were technically allowed to be in the military, where previously all members of the LGBTQ plus community were banned. But to a certain extent, Lisa and Anna needed to keep their relationship as low-key as possible, which was the cornerstone of the don't ask, don't tell policy. While Lisa and Anna were together and married, whether or not they continued to be stationed together at their various locations isn't clear. According to Crime Watch Daily, Lisa was first stationed in Louisiana for a period of time. Then she was sent to California, which is the only California connection in the story, therefore technically qualifies for this podcast. And then after her time in California, she was stationed in Kodiak, Alaska. And her commanding officer is Adrian Loya. The irony in all of this, and it's something to bear in mind as we go along here, is the fact that, as I mentioned a moment ago, Lisa and Loya, both independently of one another, not even knowing each other, listed Kodiak, Alaska as the last place they wanted to be stationed, yet there they both were. Fate, I guess. Fate sometimes can be a bitch. By all accounts, Loya was dedicated to his job as an IT specialist and took it very seriously. Being a guardsman was his entire identity. It was one of the very first times in his life where he felt like it was a good fit for him. He did really well. He's been described as a guardsman through and through, and it was something that he was very proud of. And considering his lackluster performance in high school, his social anxieties and awkwardness, it was very much a welcomed change of pace for Loya. When Lisa was shipped off to Kodiak and Loya became her direct supervisor, the two quickly became good friends after having met at a Coast Guard morale building event in September of 2011. As it turns out, Loya and Lisa really didn't grow up too far from one another back in Texas. They had similar senses of humor. They enjoyed the same television shows. They just had all of these little things in common that made for endless hours of conversations and laughs. Lisa sort of brought Loya out of his shell in a way. He was a loner most of the time. When he wasn't working, he usually stayed home by himself on his computer, either shopping or gaming. Lisa was the first real friend that he had made, and he quickly considered her one of his best friends. Anna was sent to Kodiak as well sometime after Lisa arrived. It was during their time in Alaska that Lisa and Anna made it official and got married. So Loya didn't know right away that Lisa was gay, so whether or not he had begun to develop romantic feelings towards her, it's hard to say, especially based on the events to follow. There does not seem to be any indication of it, but because Lisa was attractive, it's kind of hard to imagine that the thought didn't cross his mind, but I don't know. It's never spelled out explicitly how he felt about her, but he did eventually find out that she was gay and that she was going to marry Anna a couple of months after they became friends in November of 2011. However, the Psychology Today article did say that Loya was very strongly opposed to the institution of marriage, which might be part of the reason why he may not have developed deep romantic feelings towards Lisa, or if he did, he never really expressed them. But he was very happy for Lisa and supportive of her marriage to Anna. In fact, there had been a time when he used a certain homophobic slur that had been a part of his everyday vernacular. He was very apologetic to Lisa about it and removed that F word from his vocabulary. So while I'm not sure why he was okay with using the slur before, he did have enough respect for Lisa to make the conscious effort to refrain from using it anymore. While Lisa and Loya were getting along swimmingly, it seemed as though Anna was not too keen on their friendship. She wasn't really all that trusting of Loya, thinking that he had less than honorable intentions when it came to his relationship with her wife. So she didn't ask Lisa, she demanded that she keep the relationship professional, to limit her interactions with Loya to work-related matters only, and to stop seeing him so much outside of work. How all of this went over with Lisa isn't really clear. I didn't read about her reactions to Anna's demands, but it seemed as though she did tell Loya about it, about how Anna felt about their friendship, that she felt uneasy and threatened by it, and that she didn't want them hanging out outside of work. But according to Psychology Today, Loya began harboring feelings of resentment towards Anna for trying to break up his friendship with Lisa, mostly because of her presumption that there was going to be something more than friendship going on between himself and Lisa, which to him couldn't be further from the truth, supposedly. In the end, Lisa went ahead and went along with Anna's wishes and stopped seeing Loya outside of work so much. Loya did not take well to Lisa choosing to cave into Anna's demands, and a rift had formed between the two of them at work that progressively got worse as the weeks and months wore on. There was friction, snide remarks, dirty looks. It was subtle but palpable. But then one evening in September of 2012, late into the evening, early hours of the morning by then, Lisa had too much to drink, and it just so happened that Anna was out of town for a work-related event for the next 3 weeks, so Loya and Lisa would have the night to themselves. They watched TV, they took in a few episodes of The Simpsons, but then, suddenly, Loya began to notice that as Lisa was seated next to him, she began pleasuring herself. This caused him to become extremely uncomfortable and anxious. It came seemingly out of nowhere. Was she just acting like this because she had had too much to drink? Or was she taking this opportunity while Anna was away to have an intimate evening with Loya? It seems like it may have been a little bit of both. There wasn't very much context around this. I don't know if there had ever been any sort of flirtation between the two of them. There was nothing that I read that indicated such things had ever happened. There was the possibility that Loya had a slight crush on her, but from all that I've seen, the two were just really good friends, best of friends even. This was one of the first close interpersonal relationships Loya had ever had, which is why he took it so hard when Anna insisted that they terminate their friendship. According to Loya's account of what happened next, he said that Lisa then tried to kiss him and he resisted. She grabbed him by the arm and led him into her bedroom, the bedroom that she shared with her wife. In his writings, Loya did admit that he was a little bit attracted to her, but he never had any intention of ever going beyond friendship with Lisa. He continued to resist her advances until she finally snapped, "Dude, what the F is your problem, man? Just come to bed." But he didn't. In fact, the moment that she put her hands on him and took him into the bedroom, in his mind, she had just crossed that line. This was a sexual assault in his eyes. She had just raped him. There was nothing more that happened after that. There was no intercourse, and while I couldn't find any information as to what Loya did next, as awkward as this situation had probably become, I wouldn't have been surprised if not too long after he rebuffed her advances that he left. And what this brings us to is the biggest question I personally have about this case. Loya saw this as a rape. The moment Lisa put her hand on his arm, was a moment that she crossed that line, and in his mind, this was a rape by definition. Is he right in thinking that? She made an indecent proposal. He turned it down. Nothing more happened between the two of them. She did take him by the arm and brought him into the bedroom and persisted. Come on, we can do it. What the F is your problem, man? What if the roles were reversed and it was the man making the sexual advances on the woman? Masturbated in front of her, then took her by the arm, led her into the bedroom, then continued to persist a little bit more, but eventually nothing happened. I think there may have been a strong case for sexual harassment, but is this a case of rape? I tend to lean towards it's not, but I want to know what you all think. I'm not going to say either way, but I'm going to say my opinion is that this doesn't constitute rape. Anyway, Loya left feeling totally violated, and Lisa made it crystal clear that Anna can't ever find out about what just happened. It would not take long for Loya to begin to develop more anxiety over the alleged rape. What we have here is a situation where he's gone over to the home of one of his subordinates. She had been drinking heavily. Both of those things would have brought about swift discipline if his bosses were to find out about this. It was a huge mistake going over there, one that he regretted immediately. He did worry about the future of his friendship with Lisa, but the bigger concern was how this might come back to bite him in the butt if anyone found out what happened. The thought did cross his mind that what if Lisa flipped the script on him and he's seen as the one who made the sexual advances? What if she accuses him of sexual misconduct? His career with the Coast Guard, which he was so proud of, would be in ruins. Loya and Lisa saw each other at work the following day. She reiterated and begged him to please don't tell anyone what happened between them, especially Anna, and she wanted to put it behind them. But Loya, he could not let it go. In fact, for more than a year after that night, he thought about it obsessively. Loya says that he was tormented every day and every night. He had nightmares. He experienced panic attacks at an alarming frequency. And what's more, he developed a deep hatred for Lisa that became all-consuming. A hatred so unrelenting that it gripped his entire existence. So much so that he put it all down in words. Tens of thousands of words in that 250-page manifesto that he titled Loya Wars, a reference to his favorite set of movies, Star Wars. Another thing that he was absolutely consumed with. But all of the tens of thousands of words contained in that seemingly endless manifesto were two words that summed up what Loya's intentions would ultimately be. And those words were, terminate her. Loya knew full well that if he went to Coast Guard investigators that there would be consequences. But he couldn't help but fear that Lisa would go to them first and turn the whole thing around on him. That he was the one that made those unwanted advances on her. He knew that she would be believed, especially since everyone knew that they'd become close friends. The only way to make sure that that didn't happen was to get ahead of it. But he wasn't sure as to how to go about it or what to say. So he tried talking to a few close people in his life. You know, he didn't have many. He asked a friend from back in high school, and he asked his dad about it, who, according to Psychology Today, he hardly ever spoke to. And he wasn't exactly getting the sympathetic ears that he was certain he would get. But rather, they were more perplexed as to why he didn't just have sex with Lisa. He decided that he was going to go ahead and make the report at the work-life office, just to make sure he got his side of the story down on record in case Lisa came forward with her side of it. While making his report, one of the things that Loya was asked is if he considered self-harm or suicide. Loya indicated in his manifesto that he was, but he replied that he was not. If he had said that he had suicidal ideations, he would have automatically been discharged from the Coast Guard. Sometime after Loya made his report, he went to speak to his commanding officer about getting transferred out of Kodiak. The officer basically laughed in his face. "You're telling me that you were raped by a gay married woman?" Being laughed at only intensified Loya's feelings of humiliation and shame. The indignity of it all was more than Loya could take. He was told that his request for a transfer to another military base was more complicated and time-consuming than his commanding officer was willing to deal with. Instead, they issued him a different desk on the other side of the office, far away from Lisa. You may be wondering why this is bothering Loya so much. The thing is that he was looking for something from Lisa. He had been tormented by what happened to him for months, and he hasn't had so much as an acknowledgement of what she did, much less even an apology. She's seemingly gone out about her life as if nothing had ever happened, yet he's haunted by it. Every waking moment he lives in fear, riddled with anxiety, punctuated by frequent panic attacks. At night, when he manages to finally fall asleep, he is jolted awake by nightmares of his rape. Yet he can't even get an "I'm sorry" from Lisa. And then there was yet another thing that occurred for Loya that was like pouring salt into a wound. They were required to attend a mandatory lecture on preventing sexual assault amongst the guardsmen. As Loya was sitting through the class, he was sent spiraling into a full-blown panic attack that culminated into an outburst of cries and tears. He looked over at Lisa and he snapped, "I hope you took notes." Over the course of the next few weeks, Loya spent all of his free time typing a lengthy email with the intentions of sending it to Lisa. He wanted her to know exactly how her actions had caused him to deteriorate emotionally and mentally. In the subject line, he wrote, "The Lisa Effect." He described his feelings at first being akin to a teenage crush, but nothing more. But he told her that the night that happened, the night that she raped him, he had never experienced that kind of fear ever before in his life. His words were to the effect that he had never been so scared in his life, and what he had been going through ever since is a textbook case of post-traumatic stress disorder. In addition to the self-diagnosis of PTSD, he also found that he was experiencing symptoms that were earmarks of Stockholm Syndrome and battered woman syndrome. He had searched the internet for anything that the symptoms that he was afflicted with that seemed to match any official medical diagnosis. When his email was completed, all printed out, it amounted to 19 pages. He hit send and he waited, fully expecting to receive a reply from Lisa, but still, he got nothing. The fear, anxiety, anger, all of it ticked up another notch as Lisa continued to refuse to acknowledge what she had done to him. So he decided to forward a copy of the email to Lisa's wife, Anna. This finally got a reaction from Lisa, and she was livid. She told Loya to stay away from them. She had no desire to have him in her life in any capacity. And yet again, just like everything else that had happened thus far, he did not take Lisa's dismissal of him well at all. To him, Lisa had violated him in the worst way, yet now she's telling him to stay out of her life? How dare she? Feeling as though he had no other options, and he was about to be finished with his time in Kodiak, not to mention all of the friction between himself and Lisa it was mounting, he decided to make an official report of the rape with the Coast Guard Investigative Services, or the CGIS. I guess Loya assumed that he would be able to file this report against Lisa and she would face some harsh consequences. The CGIS opened an investigation, and they also gave Loya the recommendation that he should seek counseling, which he did in April of 2013. And he did so for the remainder of his time in Alaska. But to Loya, the therapy only made things worse. Every session always came back to Loya being told the same things. Stay away from Lisa and move on. He had to let go of this incident, but it was clear that he wasn't able to do that. When his time in Alaska was up in May of 2013, he was sent to his new base in Chesapeake, Virginia. He told his therapist in Alaska that he would continue to seek therapy in that state, but he never did, feeling that his counselors only made him feel worse about the rape. So on the very same day that Loya reported for his first day in Chesapeake, he received a call from the CGIS back in Alaska that they had closed his case. Not only was he told that investigators were skeptical that a rape even took place, they reprimanded him. They told him that he should have never gone over to Lisa's house because he was her superior. She was the subordinate. They also said in their report after interviewing Lisa that he was further being reprimanded for harassing her and causing, quote, individual angst and decreased productivity in the workplace. As for Lisa, she received a write-up for drinking, and that was it. They found no other wrongdoing on her part. In his writings, Loya said it was the very first time in his life that he felt hate. That was the last straw for Loya. He no longer wanted to be in the Coast Guard, and he wanted to die. But he also wanted Lisa to die too. He could not stand the injustice of it all. And if he was going to die, he could not let Lisa get away with what she did. What if she does it again to someone else? He needed to handle this himself if nobody else was going to do it. Not too long after Loya's transfer to Chesapeake, Lisa and Anna were transferred to Bourne, Massachusetts. So, before her transfer, Lisa was 4,865 miles or 7,830 kilometers away from Loya. But with this transfer to Bourne, she would now only be 600 miles or 965 kilometers away. That amounts to about a 10-hour drive, much less than the 91-hour drive to Kodiak. By the summer of 2014, Loya told himself that he needed to stop thinking about killing Lisa. He needed to start planning to do it for real. And as far as Lisa and Anna were concerned, this whole entire ordeal with Loya was done with for good. They would never have to think, see, or worry about him ever again, so they thought. But it wasn't going to be that simple for Loya. His anger and resentment had reached a boiling point. He couldn't get over the fact that he was the one being disciplined when she was the one who was in the wrong. That disciplinary letter was going to follow him for the remainder of his career in the Coast Guard. Any of his future superior officers are going to be able to see it right away and know what happened, only piling on the humiliation. His name and his reputation were ruined forever. And Lisa, in his eyes, caused all of this. Before, he was a model guardsman. He had never been in trouble. His spotless record was gone. And she was the one who raped him, in his mind. And just when Loya is thinking that things can't possibly get any worse, he'd actually been considered as a candidate for a promotion, but he was passed over. He was certain it was because of that disciplinary letter in his personnel file. Again, he placed the blame completely on Lisa. The more that things in Loya's life went wrong that he attributed to Lisa's actions, the more his anger and hatred towards her intensified. She violated him and she smeared his good name. At some point, this took a turn in Loya's mind. This went from friends having a falling out to a battle between good and evil. Lisa was wrong in everything that she did, and she's just been able to move on happily ever after with her wife. But Loya sees himself as having done absolutely nothing wrong and is left to wallow in the wreckage that she has left behind. His life was a mess. His emotional state was in shambles. It was a wrong that needed to be made right, and he decided that he was going to make those things right. He wanted to even the score. This was an eye for an eye type of situation for him. Lisa destroyed his life and his career. Therefore, he was going to destroy hers. Loya viewed himself as a victim. He was tired of being the victim and all of the fallout that came with that. In his mind, Lisa needed to be victimized too. She had to experience it to know and understand what he's been feeling and dealing with ever since all of this happened. It was her turn to hurt and to be angry and to suffer. But he wasn't going to just confront her or cause her any sort of physical or emotional harm. That wasn't going to be enough. She needed to be terminated, taken out. In Loya's mind, it's been said that he saw this conflict as being like a conflict in Star Wars, good versus evil. He was the good, Lisa was the evil. And the only way to deal with evil is to snuff it out. And Loya intended to win this battle. All of this sounds kind of way out there, doesn't it? But we are talking about a person who sounds like they are struggling with some mental health problems because wanting Lisa dead as an act of revenge for a perceived wrong is irrational. That's what this really boils down to. He was seeking revenge against Lisa for having destroyed his life and his career. It was a thing that would follow him for the rest of his life, and he could not allow her to move on from this as if nothing happened. He had to even the score. If you recall, the night in question happened back in September of 2012. About a year passed while he tried to figure out what to do next. And he had spent another year carefully laying out his plan in his 250-page manifesto that he titled Loya Wars. Like I said, I wish I could read it, but according to the article in Psychology Today, Loya wrote about the nature of his relationship with Lisa, how it came to be, and what happened that night in September, and the reasons why he wanted her dead. He obsessed over what happened with Lisa, and he spilled all of his feelings out into that manifesto along with his plan. The most chilling part of the manifesto was the final chapter titled Operation Purple Rebel. It was a list of 13 points detailing how he was intending to carry out this plan. One thing is clear in all of its 250 pages. He wanted Lisa dead, and he wanted to be the one to kill her. One excerpt from the manifesto read, "The mission is a basic assassination mission. Confront Lisa any way I can and terminate her. Make sure Lisa knows that it is I taking her life and why. This should be very interesting how it actually plays out. I'm excited." And he punctuated that with an exclamation point. By October of 2014, Loya pretty much had his plan fully set, which he referred to as that basic assassination mission. So what he began doing next was some reconnaissance work. I guess that's the best way to describe it. I would have said that he's stalking them. But anyway, he managed to find, through a search of personnel records, Lisa and Anna's home in Bourne, Massachusetts. And with that, he made a run-through of his plan and drove the 10 hours from his place of residence in Chesapeake, Virginia. When he got there, the first thing he wanted to do was confirm that this was the correct address. So he installed several trail cameras or hunting cameras that were trained on the house. And before long, Loya was able to see that they did indeed live there. He watched as the women came and went from their home, doing their everyday things. Sometimes they left together, sometimes they left alone. There was footage of Lisa walking their dog, with no idea that this man had these cameras set up to spy on them. And this is some 4 months before the day that he was planning to carry out the killing. Not only did Loya set those cameras around their house, he also drove around their neighborhood in order to get a lay of the land, to figure where the neighbors were, other houses and complexes, the street that Lisa and Anna lived on, as well as the surrounding areas. All the while, he's recording everything around him as he's driving with a GoPro. At some point, as he was driving and recording, Loya actually began experiencing one of his panic attacks. So he took the GoPro and turned it around to face him and recorded this panic attack as it was happening. You can see excerpts of this video on Crime Watch Daily on YouTube. You can see him as he says, "All right," pulling over to the side of the road. "I'm having like a panic attack. I started hyperventilating. I feel paralyzed. I can't move." As he parked, he continued talking into his camera. It was bad. My whole body was tingling, a weird tingling sensation, and I realized I was getting into an accident. So I wasn't able to totally control the car anymore. So I slowed down and pulled off the side of the road, turned the hazards on, and that's when I started the video because I knew this was big and people needed to know about it. I guess also for my records so I can see what happens. This helped out a lot. Walked out. It's pretty out here. Looking gorgeous this time of year. I'm going to start heading to the car, so yeah, this is for myself. This is for the investigators. No more secrets like this. Thank you for listening. 4 months after that reconnaissance mission, Loya was ready. He intended to carry out the murder on his 31st birthday, February 5th, 2005. It was a Thursday that day. Loya liked calling this his mission, but I don't particularly like it. It's a plan to murder. Let's call it what it is. Several days earlier on Sunday, February 1st, was the day that he arrived in Bourne, Massachusetts. He checked into a motel where he had a room reserved. The location was very close to Lisa and Anna's condo. In the days leading up to his departure from Chesapeake, Loya took care of some of his personal affairs. He called up his mom and dad and asked them to not contact him on his birthday. I have no idea what excuse he gave his parents. He just said to not call. He gave away several boxes of his belongings, and amongst those belongings was his coveted Star Trek costume, I guess. And before he left, he knew that law enforcement would show up at his home after the fact. So according to Psychology Today, Loya set up a life-sized cardboard cutout of Princess Leia and Han Solo, both of them holding weapons. He spread gun oil all over the floor. He hung a large fake spider from the ceiling. He also left on that day that happened to be Super Bowl Sunday, thinking that he would be able to leave town without anyone noticing because they'd be busy watching football parties. And if you ask me, I don't think anyone would have noticed he was gone or even cared, but that's just an opinion. The weather was frigid. There were still stretches of snow frozen into the ice along the road. It had been nearly 2 years since Loya and Lisa exchanged words, but no matter how much time passed, the way he was feeling did not fade. In fact, it only grew worse. As Loya drove, he was calm. So to him, this meant that he was ready. He would later say in an interview, quote, "Going to their house that night, there was no feeling. That's what creeps me out the most about myself. I felt nothing. I was going to my death. Felt no fear about going to my death, no anxiety, no shaking, no butterflies. But that night at Lisa's house in September of 2012 was the scariest moment ever. I was feeling all the terrifying sensations of just a woman trying to kiss me. This was scary, but it was nowhere near that bad that night at Lisa's house. On Wednesday, February 4th, Loya again surreptitiously set up his trail cameras back at the house to make sure that both Lisa and Anna were going to be home when he would break into their house in the middle of the night. Hours later, he got his cameras and he watched from his laptop as both Lisa and Anna returned home that evening and never left again. They were both there. The clock ticked past midnight into February 5th. This would be Loya's 31st birthday, and what he intended to be his last, so he says. He was ready for death, but he could not leave his rapist alive to harm anyone else. In Loya's mind, it was the right thing to do, since nobody else seemed to think Lisa did anything wrong. She raped him and tormented him, yet faced no consequences for her actions. He couldn't let her live to hurt anyone else the way she had hurt him. Loya Wars was underway just after 2 a.m. on his birthday. Loya had noted that there was one way in and out of Anna and Lisa's complex where their condo was located. In order to delay police and emergency vehicles from reaching the residence, he parked his car in a way that completely obstructed anyone from being able to drive in, and he lit it on fire. He also had with him some sort of music player, like a portable stereo, something like that. He set it on the ground outside of the burning vehicle and pressed play. It was the Star Wars theme. Then, as another diversionary ploy, he also had with him some devices that he built that looked like explosives, and he set 2 of them up along the road, hoping to further delay authorities and paramedics from reaching his intended targets. Loya was dressed in full tactical gear, and he was wearing a mask. He also had his GoPro camera with him, attached to the front of his chest. Yes, this man recorded everything that is about to happen. Loya began walking towards Lisa and Anna's condo. There is snow on the ground. He had 4 guns, 1 knife, and 2 sets of handcuffs. Before he got to the front door, he hid one of his guns, a rifle, behind a nearby bank of snow. As he stood at the front door, he raised one of his weapons and fired 2 shots aimed at the door lock. He was in. The following is a transcription of Anna Trubnikova's account of what happened, with some of the parts edited out. All of this is in her own words. She speaks a little bit awkwardly, but this is her direct account of what they went through that evening. Anna said, "There was some sort of noise where she, meaning Lisa, kind of stirred in bed, and that woke me up. And I, half asleep, kind of remember some noise. I don't know what it was. She said something to me, to which I said it's nothing. I'm pretty sure I was half asleep, but I said it's nothing, that it might be the cats. And then I think I heard some noise, a lot more pronounced, I guess. And then I just heard a very heavy stomping like someone was approaching up the stairs. A tall body stormed through the entrance door to the bedroom, which was kind of at the end of our bedroom, and our bed was a little long. It was dark in the room. The person was dressed in all dark, and we saw a light. I think I remember identifying like a flashlight because it was shining in our faces, and at some point I can see it's a rifle of some sort. There was a lot of shock and confusion. He was yelling. The more he was talking and yelling commands, I saw that he had another, maybe rifle of some sort on his left shoulder. Lisa right away starts saying, "Who are you? What do you want?" He wouldn't say anything. So eventually, I think her questions prompted him to yell out, "Shut up! Separate!" I was on the right side of the bed. She was on my left. We were so confused, and then he kind of in the middle of the room. I think because we were responding the way that we were told, he was agitated. I wasn't as cooperative because it didn't seem right. I thought maybe it was the wrong house. Like none of this made sense, so I didn't respond. In that situation, I didn't want to separate because it was very confusing. He just kept ordering. He came up to the bed and pulled the covers off of us. And at some point after that, he got my phone that was on my right on the nightstand and threw it away somewhere. I'm not sure where. And just continued doing that. I think at that point we were panicked. It seemed like very deliberate towards. It was like not a mistake. He was yelling. He seemed to be agitated, and he said to get on separate ends of the bed on the floor face down. Lisa kept objecting, and I think asking, "What do you want? Who are you?" He had a mask on and a lot of tactical gear. We had still no idea who it was or why. And at that point, I believe he cocked the gun and kind of approached us. So I totally said to just do whatever he wants and to get down on that side. I also followed. So we both at that point got on opposite sides of the bed. He threw handcuffs at us. He reached them from the back of his gear, and he threw one to me first and threw to Lisa the other. And he spoke directly to her and said in a very facetious way, "You know what to do with them." Neither of us complied. The last thing I wanted was to be restricted in that situation, so I refused to do it. He noticed that and was shouting and ordering more commands, saying, "Put them on." I put the handcuffs on my side on my right wrist, and I hid my left hand under some clothes or something so that I could avoid putting them on completely. I don't think Lisa did it. I believe she was just very defiant. I think before the handcuffs, because Lisa kept asking, "Who are you and what do you want?" he did take the mask off. I recognized him because she yelled out his name in shock, and it kind of just both came together for me as well because I wasn't familiar with him. It was Adrian Loya. He was talking to her. Most of that time he was in the room, mostly spoke to her. He said, actually shortly after he took the mask off, he said, and she kind of shouted his name, and he's like, "See what you've done to me? You're making me do this. This is what I've become because of you." And she was asking, "What did I do?" or "Sorry." He said, "It's too late." Just a lot of repetitive things over and over. I mean, she would mostly say, "I'm sorry," or "Why are you doing this?" I don't think he ever specified why, except saying that she did this to him and something about Kodiak. I just know that she said, "I'm sorry, I was drunk, I didn't mean to hurt you." Somewhere in between that, I also kept saying, "I'm sorry." I tried to appease him. He seemed angry and agitated, walking back and forth in the room, looking out the window, back at the door. He was angry at us for not complying and agitated. In between telling us what to do, he looked out the window, and at some point he walked towards the door that he came from and kind of looked towards it, but it didn't linger very long. I figured he heard something, and afterwards he became a little more time constricted. He kind of got back once again to getting us to do what he wanted. He approached us after looking at the door and threw glow sticks that he activated with his mouth. So he threw one near me where I was halfway laying down, and he threw one at Lisa's side where she was kind of the same. He continued to pace and talk to Lisa for the most part. I think actually when she refused to put the handcuffs, he approached her and there was some sort of physical contact. Either she tried to push him away or I don't know exactly what it was, but I remember he came very close to her. And I was very shocked because she knew him well from before, and she said, "This makes no sense. Why are you doing this?" He backed up, and I think more time kept going by, and he again looked and approached the door. He disappeared from my view for a split second, So I started to pull the mattress towards me, and Lisa saw that and she pushed it towards me from her side and jumped over the empty bed side of it. So some of it was still on the bed, and she crawled over to my side of the bed. So now we're on the right side of the bed. Once she sat next to me, the mattress was halfway over us, halfway on the corner of the bed. So I think it was tilted at some point towards me, and the other side was more raised over her. He heard the rustling. He reappeared and said, "What do you think you're doing?" Rushed towards us with the rifle and kind of tried to pull it off of us, the mattress. But from what I remember, the mattress stayed covering the lower half of us, maybe a little less her than me because I was more in the corner that was tilted down. He was standing over us pretty close. I heard one shot out of the rifle. I don't remember seeing it, but I remember hearing it. But that was it, and I thought maybe it's a warning shot. Can I actually backtrack a little bit to him approaching the mattress? When he approached the mattress, he pulled it or tried to pull it back off of us. I realized that Lisa had grabbed her phone from her side and she was doing something with it, where when I looked at the screen of the phone, it was lit up and it was very bright. I realized that he was now approaching us and we'll see that, and I knew that was just going to make him angrier. I knocked it out of her hand, fearing that that's only going to make him angrier, since to that point we weren't shot yet. Maybe there was an opportunity to not do it. I knocked it out, and that's when the shot came out. He said, "What do you think you're doing?" And maybe seconds afterwards, there were more shots. I knew they weren't at me. I didn't feel it yet. The sound also went to my left, and at some point there were more shots. Then I finally felt getting shot myself, mainly through my right arm, going numb and curling up. At some point, the shots ceased. I figured we only had seconds to live. I turned to Lisa and I said, "I love you," to which she responded, "I love you too." And we were very close. She was facing me, kind of, and I just turned my head and I kissed her lips. And I remember her lips going limp, as if she got really weak. And right after that, I heard a lot of gushing blood, gurgling almost. She started choking like a wet cough and exhaled, and it was a very deep exhale, and I, for myself, knew that she was dead at that point. After the shots were fired, I do not remember having a visual on him. I don't know if he was next to us or left the house or the room. I don't know. I was laying there after and I figured she died. I was waiting to die. I didn't feel a whole lot physically. I figured she died, so I'm next in a matter of seconds. But I realized that I was thinking and processing information. I knew that at least I wasn't shot in the head. And just more thoughts come up. If he's in the house still. Somewhere in between those thoughts, I heard at the back of my head somewhere, I think I was halfway in the closet, in the walk-in closet. I heard, I think, a man saying, "911, what is your emergency?" I realized that at some point she must have dialed 911, and perhaps the phone was on the whole time. I reached for it with my left hand. I couldn't move. I think that was the only moving part on me. And I tried at that point. I tried to speak to whoever it was. I think that they were not very responsive at first. Either I was on hold or there was a moment I wasn't really speaking to them. And then somebody else started talking to me, or there was like some ringing. I was very confused. And then again, they asked me, "What is your emergency?" And I said that my wife and I were shot and that she's dead. At the first words with 911, I only knew that there was something wrong with my right arm, obviously from the shots. I didn't know exactly what was wrong. Okay, that's the end of the transcript of Anna's account of what happened. I do want to point out that from the time Anna began talking to the 911 operator to the time that help finally arrived, it was an agonizing 56 minutes that had passed. Throughout the call, Anna can be heard begging for help and sometimes not believing that anyone was coming. Remember, Loya had set up those diversions, the car that he had set on fire and the bombs, which turned out to be dummies, by the way. Also, there was a split second of a moment just after Loya had burst into Lisa and Anna's room, where he later said that he had second thoughts about going through with this. When he was screaming at Lisa as she was apologizing, he yelled, "You had 2 years to say that you're sorry." He was looking her dead in the eye, and the intense fear that Lisa was experiencing, the look on her face, it caused him to be taken aback by it. I guess you never know what it looks like to actually put the fear of God into a person unless you go and do it. And seeing that in Lisa's face really threw him for a loop. He later described feeling himself losing control. He quickly managed to compose himself. That's about the time his plan started going off script. Figuring that these women were not listening to him, the plan was not going to be able to go the way that he wanted it. Anna was shot 4 times, once through the right arm, once through the left arm, on her left outer thigh, and into her chest. The bullet wound to her chest collapsed her lung. On the 911 call, you can hear her saying that she couldn't breathe. Lisa was shot 11 times, but Loya's plan did not play out exactly the way he wanted it to. He wanted this killing to be up close and personal. He wanted the women to put on the handcuffs to make sure that he had control of the situation. He didn't intend to use the guns. Those were meant to scare the women into complying with his demands. But I guess he didn't take into account Anna and Lisa being so uncooperative. He wrote in his manifesto that the last thing he wanted Lisa to feel was fear. He wanted her to die while experiencing intense fear. And that is what the knife was for. He intended to slit Lisa's throat, and that's as up close and personal as you can get. He wanted Lisa and Anna on opposite sides of the bed because he had no intentions of harming Anna, just Lisa. But when Lisa crawled over the bed and joined Anna on the other side, they were struggling to get that mattress situated. I can't say that I think that they were trying to shield themselves, but maybe make it difficult for him to aim at them because the mattress isn't going to do much. But the mattress didn't fully cover them. His plan was going off the rails, and he went ahead and shot both of them through the mattress. From there, Loya expected a confrontation with police. This was the suicide part of his plan. He wanted this to be a suicide by cop. Loya had exited Lisa and Anna's home fully expecting to find himself in a shootout with police, but there was absolutely no one around. He waited, he was agitated, and he became impatient. And this is another point in his plan that was not going the way he wanted. He was starting to lose his nerve. That was all his doing because he set his car on fire. The police couldn't get through. The ambulances couldn't get through. And while he waited, he was still placing more fake bombs around the area. And that portable stereo was still playing. It had cycled through some theme music from Batman Begins and James Bond. Finally, one of the officers that arrived at the scene, his name was Jared McDonald, and he is going into this blindly. They know that there is a gunman around, and he is in hiding somewhere. This is also part of the reason why it took so impossibly long for paramedics to reach Anna. They didn't know where the suspect was, and they were afraid he was hiding, waiting to open fire on officers, which is exactly what happened. Officer McDonald had been shot 1 time in the back, barely missing the bulletproof vest that he was wearing that would have stopped that bullet from entering his body. It barely missed. It went into his back, and it also just barely missed his spine too. Though it did go through his kidney and his liver, and it came to rest inside his body, just barely touching the inside surface of his abdomen. The bullet wound, of course, caused Officer McDonald to fall to the ground, and he lost the ability to use his right leg. So when he was able to get his wits about him, it was just enough for him to get himself behind his patrol car, and he radioed to the others that he had been shot. From there, the surroundings became eerily silent. And with that, just a few minutes after all this mayhem, Adrian Loya showed himself. Of course, the officers began shouting orders. He slowly laid down his guns and his body camera, and he surrendered. It wasn't the ending that he had hoped for, but really, just due to the fact that he surrendered, goes to show that maybe he really didn't want to die after all. Once officers had Loya in handcuffs, the 911 operator was able to tell Anna that the man was in custody. Of course, she is still fearful that he will come back and find her alive and finish her off. And like I said a moment ago, help finally arrived 56 minutes after Lisa dialed 911, right before Anna knocked that phone from her hand. I'm not too much of a believer in miracles, but Anna surviving those wounds, especially the one that pierced her lung, collapsing it as it filled up with blood, and having to wait 56 minutes for anyone to just begin to help her, it feels sort of like a small miracle. Like she was able to hang on just long enough for them to get there. Officer McDonald was also rushed to the hospital. He survived his injuries as well and recovered. And in all of this mess, Adrian Loya emerged from this without so much as a scratch on him. But because he survived, he considered this to be a war that he lost. He was arrested and charged with Lisa's murder, along with a myriad of other crimes. On the night he was arrested, he spilled everything and gave a full confession, and he did it eagerly. He actually enjoyed having an audience to tell it to. He pleaded not guilty, and if you think his attorneys are going to go with the insanity defense, you would be correct. So when Loya went on trial in September of 2017, it was going to be a battle of the experts. And ultimately, what the jury is going to decide is what this all boils down to. Loya was evaluated by mental health professionals and diagnosed with major depressive disorder, but competent to stand trial. The Commonwealth, that's what they call the prosecution side of the trial over there. Over here on this side of the United States, we call it the state. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts presented a case of a very detailed plan to kill, one that Loya deliberated for well over a year. And they pointed to the 250-page manifesto, all of the reconnaissance, but we'll call it what it is, stalking, as well as his nearly enthusiastic confession. It's as premeditated as all get out, make no mistake. He had an overabundance of opportunities to put a stop to this. Even a moment in the bedroom when he began to get cold feet. All of his actions speak to his ability to discern right from wrong. But the defense argued that Loya was experiencing delusional thoughts, and they said that these delusions extended from the time that he claimed he was sexually assaulted by Lisa all the way up to the murder, and it is clear in all of his bizarre actions and all the dramatics peppered throughout his plan that he had the inability to understand the wrongness of his actions. After the prosecution presented their case, the defense called its one and only witness, forensic psychologist John Degnault. In all, he had spent far more time with Loya than the Commonwealth's experts, a total of 17 visits that amounted to 48 hours. According to Psychology Today, Dr. Degnault found that Loya suffered delusions of the persecutory type, involving beliefs being conspired against, cheated, spied on, followed, maliciously maligned, harassed, or obstructed in the pursuit of long-term goals. In addition, the psychologist stated that the delusions were amplified by a major depressive disorder from the Coast Guard's disciplinary action and that he came to the conclusion that Loya's state of mind met the standard for being not criminally responsible. The doctor said on the stand, "He's crazy." The judge giggled a little bit, but tried to play it off like he had gas or something. No, he didn't do that, but it was obvious that this statement amused him. Another expert that had been presented at trial by the prosecution concurred with Dr. Daignault. This would be Dr. Martin Kelly. He also came to the conclusion that Loya was delusional and was looking for what he termed as moral vengeance, that he was enthusiastic about being seen as a hero, and that this was akin to the storyline in Star Wars, good versus evil. He also diagnosed Loya as having Asperger's syndrome. So in total, there were 4 experts who testified at Loya's trial. 2 of them found him to be criminally responsible for his actions. 2 of them found him to not be criminally responsible. But once Asperger's was brought up, the Commonwealth wanted to bring in someone who was more knowledgeable when it came to Asperger's and autism. This would be Dr. Judith Edersheim. And it was her opinion that Loya was neither autistic or delusional. And she found that Loya was criminally responsible for his conduct. But the problem with that is Dr. Edersheim did not ever meet with Loya, but rather came to her conclusions based on his manifesto, some of the emails that he wrote, and his arrest report. From what she could see, Loya had 2 personality disorders, avoidant and borderline. But he was not someone who was isolated or someone who preferred to be alone, nor did he demonstrate any symptoms indicative of psychosis. In her testimony, she said that Loya never experienced a break from reality, and that there was a plethora of evidence indicative of knowing exactly what he was doing and that it was wrong. From there, the case went to the jury. They spent 3 days in deliberations and came back with a unanimous verdict of guilty of first-degree murder with deliberate premeditation and extreme cruelty, along with the other 29 counts that he was charged with, all of them guilty. Loya is somewhere in a maximum security facility in Massachusetts, and in an interview, he called the prison the Americanized idea of hell. The remainder of the Psychology Today article is kind of interesting, so I'm going to read some excerpts from that. All of this information came from Loya in interviews after the fact, after his conviction and incarceration. Loya maintains that he consistently tried to get some kind of help from his superior officers, from his colleagues, and even from his own family, but they basically told him every single time to just get over it. Loya believes that if he had been given the right treatment at the most critical time, that this story may have had a different ending. After Loya was arrested, he was sent to Bridgewater State Hospital that houses the criminally insane and those who are being evaluated as to whether or not they are fit for trial. It was there that he had the opportunity to participate in some group therapy, and he was prescribed Prozac. It was after a year of treatment that Loya admitted that he was able to see how horrible everything was and how it could have just as easily been fixed. Granted, Loya did report his issues to his superiors, who then told him to get counseling, which he did, but when it came to the critical time for him to receive treatment, he was no longer pursuing it. The critical time being when he became homicidal and was planning out this murder. Dr. Daignault said that there was a time in June of 2014 when Loya thought about reconsidering his murder plan and going to seek professional help instead, but he was afraid if he told his plans to a therapist, it would be uncomfortable and he might get arrested. From there, Loya saw himself as a lost cause. So the question lingers. If Loya had chosen to seek help to confront the homicidal impulses he was experiencing, would he have decided to abandon his plan? He had a clear idea of what the consequences were going to be. Even if he just told the therapist he wanted to murder someone, that he might get arrested, and he didn't want that. So he was able to make the distinction that his actions were wrong. And there's another question. How much of the responsibility of this falls on the Coast Guard itself? It was never brought up at trial if they should have done more when it came to Loya's mental health. Remember, he was laughed at by his commanding officer. His friends were puzzled as to why he didn't just have sex with Lisa. One of the things Dr. Degnault noted is that Loya likely suffered from schizoid personality disorder ever since he was a child, punctuated with social detachment and underachievement. What does Loya's father think? He thinks the Coast Guard needs to issue a formal apology to Lisa and Anna, but he also believes that they owe his son an apology as well. Loya's father, George, remember in the beginning when his mother, Shirley, noticed a shift in her son's behavior and thought that he needed help, but George called it a phase? That's what he's referring to in an interview when he said, "The biggest mistake I made with my son was I wouldn't listen to him when he had problems. Adrian's guilty, there's no doubt about that, but the question was always why. Something drove Adrian to be the man that he wasn't." Loya's mother said in an interview that it's kind of scary to think, was it us? Should I have fought harder to get him help earlier? I don't know, but it's a losing battle because it's all past. As for Loya himself, he continues to maintain that Lisa did assault him that September night back in 2012, but has since admitted that he was not raped. At one point, he referred to it as a rape of the mind. He stated, "Lisa never really did anything that bad to me, and it's because of how my mind is wired that her actions seemed horrible. I now believe that the Coast Guard, in their own special way, tried to help by not doing anything. They all knew if that quote-unquote bad night got officially dealt with, it would cause major problems to two good guardsmen. I escalated it because I was too stupid and naive to leave well enough alone. And look what it got me." There was another interesting thing that Loya did when the trial was going on. It was just before the jury was to receive the case to deliberate. The attorneys were up at the front talking to the judge. It's called a sidebar. And in that moment, Adrian turned towards the jury and said, "I am guilty." His attorney got really upset, and so did the judge, and threatened to kick him out of the court. Anna will not give interviews about this case and is trying to move on with her life. Officer McDonald, who was shot in the back by Loya, went into retirement and suffers from bouts of pain and nerve damage and gets around with a service dog. Lisa's mother did visit him in the hospital, where she hugged him and thanked him. I said in the beginning these lives collided, and the ripple effect of the wreckage it caused is infinite. The irony is not lost in the fact that these two people received their orders that sent them to a tiny island in the Alaska Aleutian chain, when the both of them had indicated it was the last place on Earth that they wanted to be sent to. That brings this 177th episode of Killafornia Dreaming to a close. Please stay tuned for a promo from the Excuse Me, That's Illegal podcast. I'm your host, Roseanne, and until next time, sweet dreams.
Oh, hey there. You like true crime stories, right? Yeah, I know, who doesn't? But I gotta admit, after a while, all those stories of murder and heartache, well, they tend to go straight to my hips. So that's why I, Leroy Luna, have created a podcast called Excuse Me, That's Illegal, where we'll take a hardcore look at some softcore crimes. No TED Talks on Bundy here. The letters BTK won't be coming from these lips, unless he had a brother that used to steal library books. Suppose I'd be willing to go balls deep into that one if that were the case. Anyways, you'll hear stories such as the Mad Pooper, a female jogger who wreaked havoc in a Colorado Springs neighborhood, using one family's front yard as her own personal dumping grounds. If this kind of content sounds like it's up your alley, Excuse Me, That's Illegal is available right now on all your favorite podcatchers. So come join me. I'll be right here waiting for you.